Welcome back, traveler. Tonight we're prying open the bedroom door of the Middle Ages. It's not what the myths promised. Desire didn't float on lute music. It marched to church bells, bands, and house lists pinned by the pantry. We'll test the real rulebook, church control of intimacy, the weekly grind of bedchamber norms, and the gritty truth of everyday conjugal life, to see where desire versus doctrine clashed, compromised, and surprisingly cooperated. From courtship customs at the well to marriage life under plague bells, you'll meet the logistics behind the legends and steal a few timeless tricks for your own routines. Do me a favor, smash like, hit subscribe, and tell me down in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is right now. Let's see this map of night owls and early birds light up. Step into a market lane just after prime. Bread steam, damp wool, a rooster who thinks he's management. Here, medieval sex and love didn't float like poetry. It walked on muddy boots between parish rules and pantry math. The bell organized desire, the beetle audited noise, and neighbors read faces the way millers read grain. You weren't just choosing a person. You were choosing kin, fields, and futures, while the church watched from the doorway with a ledger and a blessing. In that space between bell and bed, people learned to harmonize desire versus doctrine without losing their sense of humor. What counted as love had three voices: canon law, custom, and cabbage. Canon law called marriage a sacrament. Custom called it a contract. Cabbage called it dinner for six when the harvest saw. Real marriage life braided all three. A pair might swap consent at a threshold, then seek the priest, then ask the reeve how a dowry becomes rent. Even bedchamber norms were seasonal. Straw changed with weather, blankets with coin, tenderness with sleep. Meanwhile, church control of intimacy kept a calendar so you didn't mistake feast days for flirt days. Courtship customs were practical theater. Fairs turned into audition halls. A ribbon gifted at dusk meant a glove return meant I heard you. Boys learned to approach near a well, public enough for safety, private enough for courage. Girls learned to answer in riddles that let a man keep his pride if he had to retreat. Mothers hovered like tactful angels. Aunts did surveillance. The parish clerk pretended not to notice and noticed everything. That's everyday conjugal life in rehearsal. Kindness, caution, and timing. The village had eyes, and they weren't shy. Bands announced intent 3 Sundays in a row so objections could surface before gossip did. Caravai, pots and pans, rowdy songs, policed obvious mismatches or broken promises, turning scandal into noise until amends were made. Sounds harsh, sure, but it was also quality control when parchment was pricey and lawyers were far. Medieval sex and love happened in public air. Privacy grew later, like ivy, once trust took hold. Law entered like a steady uncle. Consent mattered. Promises mattered enough that abandoning them earned sermons and sometimes fine. Families negotiated dowry and dower so marriage life could survive the weather. No one romanticized an empty granary. A good match balanced virtue, skill, and sturdy humor. The kind that makes milking at dawn less lonely. The priest blessed the union. The reeve counted the coin. The neighbors tested the pair with borrowed tools and borrowed patience. Calendars shaped bodies. Church control of intimacy drew borders around Lent and Advent. Major feasts, Sundays, and sometimes fast eves. Sickness and pilgrimage carved their own pauses. Did couples always obey? Confessional suggests they tried, failed, tried again. The best advice sounded like this: let the bell lead, and don't make the bed argue with the altar. That's desire versus doctrine domesticated. Less fire, more hearth. Privacy was a negotiation, not a room. Many houses were one big sentence with commas for curtains. Grandparents, babies, servants, and winter all slept close. So bedchamber norms prized quiet courtesy and creativity. A blanket angled for dignity, a whispered prayer for timing, a door bar set softly so the latch didn't gossip. You learned to make tenderness small and regular rather than loud and rare. That habit, more than furniture, built everyday conjugal life. Literature complicated expectations. Troubadours sang of sighing nights and unattainable ladies. Ploughmen sang of bread, backs, and laughter after chores. Between the two stood you, trying to honour both the poem and the pantry. Medieval sex and love wore silk in story and plain wool at supper. A wise couple borrowed charm from the poem and stamina from the field, then put both to work washing rushes and mending bucket. Glamour visits, routine stays. Canonists wrote about the marital debt with less romance and more mercy. A mutual duty to care for each other, food and affection in the same ledger. That didn't mean a ledger could force a heart. It meant love had a legal skeleton, so it could keep standing when moods went on pilgrimage. In practice, it sounded like, don't weaponize sleep, don't hoard comfort, don't let pride turn warm soup cold. That's everyday conjugal life the way old people define it, with soup, not speeches. Confession kept couples honest. Penitentials listed do's and don'ts with alarming specificity. Priests translated them into household advice. Less wine, more patience. Keep feast rules, be kind when frost makes tempers thin. Church control of intimacy could feel fussy, but it also defended the vulnerable, insisting on consent, denouncing violence, reminding towns that affection isn't a luxury product. When the parish worked, it made rooms safer, not colder. Love had props, rings, belts, keys, and sheets. A ring said, "Witnesses heard us." A belt said, "We share stores." A key said, "You open what I open." Wedding ceremonies, brief, noisy, then private, let the community escort the couple to their threshold and, crucially, leave. After that, bedchamber norms turned gentle. A prayer at the edge of the mattress, a basin for washing, a whispered joke about snoring. You see? Even at the door of the bed, desire versus doctrine found a handshake. Hold this frame as our leitmotif. Between bell and bed, people chose warmth, witness, and work. That's the map. ... Next, we'll zoom into the actual rule book you had to navigate. Who could marry whom? What counted as a promise? How gifts, bans, and household deals turned romance into law. So you can feel how courtship customs slid into contracts without suffocating the spark. Start with a cool parish morning, damp stone, beeswax, and the scratch of the clerk's quill. 3 names are read aloud, once, twice, thrice, and suddenly your private hope has neighbours. That's the bands doing their quiet thunder, turning courtship customs into something the village can witness and protect. If anyone knows a reason you shouldn't marry, kin too close, vow unfinished, spouse inconveniently alive, this is their chance to speak without turning a wedding feast into a court case. In practice, the bands brought you safety and time, and in medieval sex and love, safety and time are the sexiest gifts no minstrel ever sings. Before the bands, there's the promise. Sometimes it's a hand fasting, fingers laced, words traded, a year and a day to prove you meant them. Sometimes it's a betrothal with a coin pressed palm to palm, or a ring that warms to the temperature of nerves. Gifts don't just sparkle, they testify. A belt says, "We'll share stores." A key says, "You'll open what I open." The law cared far less about poetry than permission, and permission lived in consent spoken where someone reliable could hear. That's desire versus doctrine agreeing to meet at the threshold rather than the hedgerow. Witnesses were the medieval version of screenshots. A priest was ideal, yes, but any honest pair of ears could turn yes into evidence, which is why lovers did not whisper in barns when bridges were available. The church preferred nuptials at the church door, public enough to invite scrutiny, sacred enough to invite gravity. Notice how church control of intimacy plays traffic cop rather than jailer here. Impediments were more than clerical speed bumps. Consanguinity charts spidered out from Adam like a bureaucrat's nightmare. Spiritual kinship from godparenting could trip you too. Prior promises counted, even if they were made in a rash of moonlight. The system seems fussy until you remember the goal. Stop desertion, prevent sticky family trees, and make sure marriage life starts with fewer legal landmines. Think of it as medieval prenups written in sermons rather than contracts. Money entered wearing 3 names: dowry, dower, and mourning gift. Dowry travelled with her. Dower protected her should you exit early. And mourning gift, when custom allowed, was a tangible, I meant it, given after the night, presented before gossip could steal the narrative. In practice, clever families treated these like life jackets for everyday conjugal life. If hailstorm and taxes get rowdy, the couple still floats. Romance is lovely. Bread is louder. Caravar. Those pot-banging parades sound cruel until you pass them as social warranties. If a widower married too soon, if a May-December match reeked of coin more than care, the pans sang until an apology or a gift to the poor quieted them. It was messy, yes, but it kept deals honest when parchment was scarce and courts were pricey. In the ecosystem of medieval sex and love, noise could be justice with a frying pan. Location mattered. A porch wedding broadcast, nothing to hide. A manor chapel implied status and better bread. A rushed exchange in a distant parish hinted at complications the home priest might not bless. Priests nudged couples toward mourning. Sober light, awake witnesses, fewer tavern footnote. The choreography told a story the village could live with. Public vow, blessed threshold, then privacy. Bedchamber norms were never just bedroom rules. They were the finale of a civic ritual. Confession boxed the edges. Penitentials listed forbidden days and seasons. Confessors translated them into human schedules. Keep Lent as Lent, keep Sunday as Sunday. Dom turned feast eves into stealth honeymoons. Did couples keep every rule? People are people. But the practice of confessing missteps meant church control of intimacy could tune behavior without torching affection. When it worked, rules protected tenderness rather than policing it to death. Hookins had afterlives. If an engagement broke, rings returned like swallows, belts rebuckled to former owners, keys went back to the chests that raised them. Courts, ecclesiastical or manorial, could compel the return, but most villages preferred negotiated grace, an aunt as mediator, a neighbor as witness, bread and humility as fees. That's the unglamorous face of courtship customs. Mending reputations, so tomorrow's market doesn't feel like a duel. The wedding itself was 2 acts. Act I at the door. Vows, exchange, blessing, clatter of joy. Act 2, at the board. Bread. Sheets witnessed without ogling. Doors shut with deliberate gentleness. A basin waited because decency loves logistics. The point wasn't voyeurism. It was to close the book on suspicion so marriage life could begin unharassed. Legal nuance hid in small words. I take you, in the present tense, could bind on the spot. A clever clerk might ask you to repeat slowly so grammar didn't make lifelong jokes. Households took note. Present tense couples set up housekeeping faster. Future tense couples needed watchful aunts and fewer corners to be painted by impatience. That's desire versus doctrine mediated by syntax of all things. Hold one last texture. A quill's scratch, becoming your surname's new chapter. A ring clicking softly on wood as it's set down and picked up. A door that knows the difference between show and shelter. You can feel the next turn, can't you? We've sealed the contract. Now the room must learn to be kind. Next up, calendars, positions, and prohibitions. Practical bedchamber norms that tried to make piety and pleasure roommates without turning either into a martyr. So everyday conjugal life could actually, well, live. Start with sound. A church bell melting into night. A latch eased gently, rushes whispering underfoot. In this hush, bedchamber norms weren't just about sheets. They were about time. The calendar set the tempo for medieval sex and love. Lent and Advent as long corridors of restraint. Sundays as islands of reverence. Vigils and major feasts as posted signs that read, "You didn't need a clock. You needed a conscience and a priest with a practical memory." That's church control of intimacy in its kindest form. not a hammer, a metronome, so bodies could keep step with the year. Inside the room, modesty was architecture. Curtains made of homespun behaved like walls. A blanket's angle became privacy policy. The banked fire promised warmth without lighting up rumor. Nudity was generally brief and pragmatic. Cold air edits enthusiasm fast. And a clean linen shift could be the treaty between warmth and shyness. The point wasn't to make affection small. It was to make it survivable in a house where in-laws, infants, and winter all believed they had squatters' rights. That's everyday conjugal life. Tenderness engineered for cramped square footage. Confessionals gave the rulebook teeth and mercy. Penitentials listed forbidden seasons and warned against turning feast eves into stealth honeymoons. Confessors translated that into human advice. Sleep more in fasting time, quarrel less in harvest crunch, don't raid the pantry of patience. When desire versus doctrine collided, a good priest pushed for moderation over melodrama. Nobody wanted a bruised conscience to share a mattress with a bruised pride. You were taught to treat affection like bread, fresh, shared, never hoarded, never stale. Positions? Writers had opinions, sometimes delivered with a straight face that could only be medieval. The common arrangement, face-to-face, unshowy, was praised for order and procreation. Acrobatic creativity was scolded as vanity in motion. Manuals fretted about intention more than geometry. Aim for union and children, not circus and bragging rights. We won't get graphic. Think of it as keep it simple, keep it kind. Church control of intimacy policed excess, not tenderness, and most couples quietly discovered timing could be moral and medical at once. After childbirth, rest was a commandment with a midwife's signature. During serious illness, affection paused so healing could hoard calories. Menstrual taboos existed in more than one parish, but practice varied, and consent trumped neighborhood theory when the door was latched. Some households also paid attention to moon phases and farmers' almanacs, where they existed, folding folk wisdom into piety. Marriage life loved routines that made mornings easier, and nothing makes a morning easier than two people who didn't treat the night like a debate club. Speech had rules too. Voices stayed low, humor stayed warm, and promises stayed short enough to keep. The bed wasn't a courtroom. It was a small country that needed treaties, not manifestos. Couples learned phrases that saved whole weeks. Tomorrow, I'm tired, not distant. Let's not wake the baby or the saints. That's everyday conjugal life at its smartest. Language that oils hinges instead of creaking them. Hygiene turned out to be romance with better branding. A basin warmed, a cloth wrung till it sighed, a sprig of mint to keep closeness kind. Little things that made affection feel like hospitality. In villages that believed smells told the truth, courtesy began at the pulse points. You didn't drown a room in scent. You framed it so soup and kisses could coexist. Etiquette manuals didn't say it outright, but everyone knew. Good washing beats bad poetry every night of the week in medieval sex and love. Consent, though wrapped in the era's language, was not a stranger here. Canonists talk of the marital debt could be abused, yes, but the better preachers hammered mutuality. Neither spouse should weaponize refusal or demand. Care is owed like bread is owed. The best marriages I've seen in the records read like steady businesses with wild weekends. Respect daily, play when the ledger allows. That's desire versus doctrine ending in a handshake, more often than a standoff. Neighbors, alas, sometimes deputized themselves. Thin walls plus active imaginations equaled unsolicited commentary. Enter soft protocols. Door bars set without drama. A stool moved to accidentally block a curious cousin's view through the curtain gap, a hearth log arranged to quiet floorboard tattling. You're not hiding sin. You're protecting sanity. Bedchamber norms were never just pious. They were pragmatic hacks for families that lived like orchestras. Many instruments, one room, no conductor after compline. The morning after had its liturgy. a cool cloth across the brow, a braid remade, a quick airing of linen so the day didn't inherit the night's heat. A soft smile in the yard beat a swagger in the lane. In communities where everyone recognizes your shoes, discretion meant you could keep delight without renting it out to gossip. Courtship customs didn't end at the wedding. They evolved into coffee. Dates disguised as chores, winks disguised as shared errands, inside jokes catched in the woodpile. Edge cases forced the rulebook to grow up. Long separations for work or war asked for letters and patience. Infertility asked for herbs, prayer, and gentler expectations. Unequal appetites asked for humor and scheduled kindness. The healthiest households treated these not as moral failures but as weather. Plan for it. Don't curse the sky every morning. Marriage life thrived on that posture. Less judgment, more logistics. A lot of forgiveness tucked between chores. If you're listening closely, you can hear the next door creak open. Calendars and conventions are one thing. Bodies and outcomes are another. After the hush and the rules come the consequences. Pregnancy hoped for or feared, midwives and remedies, cradle songs and baptism water, and the quiet politics of lineage. Ready to step from night rituals into daylight realities, and watch how love, law, and luck negotiated the arrival of a child in everyday conjugal life? You wake to the sound of a kettle, thinking about kindness. The room smells of tallow, warm bread, and something sweeter you can't quite name. In the logic of everyday conjugal life, the first missed bleeding is a riddle. The whole household reads. The steward quietly adjusts grain. The aunt starts folding extra linen. The husband walks a little lighter, even when boots are heavy. This isn't just biology. It's budgeting, diplomacy, and weather prediction in one breath. In medieval sex and love, a child could be covenant, inheritance, and new chaos, depending on the month and the harvest. News travels by glances, before it travels by words. You touch the belly as if it might answer back. He steadies the door latch longer than it needs steadying. Around you, bedchamber, norms pivot from privacy to prudence. Fewer late chores, gentler stairs, more seating near the warm wall. You won't announce yet, not loudly. The old women count by moons and moods, not just weeks. Meanwhile, neighbors pretend they can't do the same math with your laundry and your appetite. Humor helps. A joke about craving pears becomes a shield against too much pity or too many predictions. Enter the midwife, bringing the smell of herbs and the gait of someone who has walked this road with half the parish. Her kit is modest and mighty. Swaddling bands rolled like small scrolls. Oils that remember summer. Twine that knows more knots than sailors. A candle stub that never sputters at the wrong time. She's part nurse, part negotiator, part theologian of common sense. In practice, she's the village's counterweight to church control of intimacy. She translates doctrine into blankets and breath, ensuring marriage life keeps its tenderness when fear tries to steal it. Remedies are recipes for patience. Molly water lets queasy mornings pass with dignity. Fennel coaxes appetite. Mint edits breath so comfort doesn't have to shout over onions. The midwife times walks to the sun's kindness and the market's quiet. When desire versus doctrine gets anxious, fast days, feast days, what if, what now? She reminds you the simplest sacrament is rest. A nap can be holier than an argument. Write that on a rush mat and read it twice. Superstition hums alongside faith like harmony. Some families hang iron by the bed to scowl at mischief. Others thread a tiny charm into the mattress lace. You might avoid funerals in the first months or step wide of nettles on Thursdays because your grandmother did. The priest may sigh, but the best ones let these small customs live if they keep courage fed. In courtship customs, ribbons spoke. In pregnancy, tokens do the talking. Quiet, local, effective. Work doesn't stop. It reconfigures. Hens still need diplomacy. Bread still wants a firm hand. But heavy casks and rickety ladders politely leave your dance card. Your husband learns a new choreography too. More lifting without making a speech about it. More listening without pretending to be a physician. That's the grown-up face of medieval sex and love. Affection becoming logistic. Nothing looks more romantic, frankly, than firewood stacked before anyone asks. Pavings arrive with comic timing and political stakes. Pears in April? Good luck. Vinegar at dawn? Achievable. Your household learns to treat sudden hungers as weather advisories, not moral tests. Meanwhile, the midwife keeps an eye on swelling, sleep, and stories you're telling yourself in the dark. She knows when a joke is armor and when it's a smokescreen. With her, everyday conjugal life adds a verse to its leitmotif. Be useful, be tender, be on time. Birth plans are mostly birth hopes, whispered with respect. Will it be at home near the warm wall, or at a neighbor's with room for more hands? Who will fetch the priest for a threshold blessing if the hours get long? If the worst threatens, who knows the emergency baptism formula? Simple as breath and water. This isn't morbid, it's merciful. In an age when weather and luck have loud voices, readiness is how marriage life says, we meant our vows. Labor Day smells like beeswax, boiled cloth, and courage. Someone watches the fire. Someone times the waves that come and go like stubborn tides. Someone keeps the doorway clear of fear and unhelpful relatives. Pain is present, not theatrical. Work is holy, not pretty. The midwife adjusts, encourages, and edits the room until it cooperates. You grip a hand that has delivered jokes and wheat and forgiveness. If you want to understand medieval sex and love, look here, desire grown into duty without losing its warmth. When the cry finally arrives, thin, outraged, miraculous, the world rearranges. The midwife checks what must be checked. A warm cloth becomes the first welcome. Oilette the fontanelle says hello in the language of touch. If health is uncertain, someone murmurs the simple baptism, not to steal the priest's part, but to make sure grace gets there first. Later, at church, the formal rite will wrap what happened in community. That's church control of intimacy at its gentlest. It turns a private victory into a public promise. Baptism Day is a procession of practical poetry. Godparents matter, chosen for piety, steadiness, and a purse that won't run away in lean years. The baby smells of milk and lavender. The basin smells like metal and mercy. A name is spoken that stitches lineage to hope. A candle flame shivers and steadies. Neighbors exhale. In that moment, desire versus doctrine looks less like a tug of war and more like a braid. Afterward, the house learns new music. Nights have teeth. Mornings have halos. Laundry has opinions. Everyday conjugal life shifts so two people can protect one small, demanding sovereign without becoming enemies. You talk in low voices because sleep is currency. You walk carefully because guilt trips are expensive. And in the middle of it, you'll catch each other grinning for no strategic reason at all. That's the spark surviving. Tamed, not tamed, both. Ready to see how nurses, wet nurses, swaddling bands, and lullabies extended that first mercy into a system the whole parish recognized. Open the chamber door and the air changes. Beeswax, warm linen, the faint sour sweet of milk, and a fire banked to a mother's pulse. The household speaks more softly, as if the baby owns the lease on volume. This is the first redesign of everyday conjugal life. A new sovereign with a 2-pound scepter dictates shifts, errands, and moods. You learn that tenderness has footnotes. Clean water within reach, a shawl ready, spoons that want gossip. In medieval sex and love, nothing is more romantic than someone who anticipates the next hour's need without grand speeches. Breastfeeding is not natural so much as learned, coached, and fueled like work. Diets tilt toward barley broth, eggs, fennel, and a kinder ale. Neighbors arrive with advice wrapped in bread and a story about their own first month. Cracked skin gets honey and goose fat. Letdown has its own weather map. Heat helps, patience helps more. The rhythm reshapes marriage life. He times the fire and doors to the feeds. She times the feeds to the hours when the house is least demanding. A good day is not a poem. It's a schedule that holds. Enter the wet nurse when fortune, health, or status requires it. Contracts can be simple, coin and cloth, or elaborate, with clauses on morals, diet, and how often the child sees home. The church sometimes frets that outsourcing milk outsources virtue. Moralists warn that character rides in on milk the way fever rides on wind. Yet midwives, pragmatic as ever, argue for survival first. Here desire versus doctrine negotiates in plain daylight. Better a thriving child at another hearth than a sick one at yours. Losing a nurse is detection and diplomacy. You look for steady eyes, clean hands, a baby of her own with clear skin and good nap habits. You ask after wine, temper, and town gossip. Payment may include shoes and linen. Tokens, small ribbons on a cradle post, mark the tie. Some places treat milk kinship almost like godparenting. It folds another adult into the child's safety net. In a world with thin margins, that net matters more than anyone's pride. Night teaches the household new music. Cradle boards squeak. Hushed steps find the warmest plank. A kettle whispers at the edge of boil for barley water. Bedchamber norms adjust without fanfare. The latch sets softly, the ember screen pulled close. Intimacy doesn't vanish, it reschedules. Shorter conversations, more touches that say, "I'm here," without waking the monarch. Couples who thrive learn to treat sleep like gold and kindness like interest. Swaddling is carpentry with cloth. You wrap long bands from shoulder to foot, not to imprison, but to steady flailing limbs. Keep heat where heat should stay, and make a small person portable in a big, drafty world. Too tight and hips complain. Too loose and nights turn slapstick. Cradles rock with a measured discipline. A warm stone in a cloth slides to the foot of the bed to bully the cold back under it. The result isn't silence, it's manageable noise you can live around. Lullabies carry the parish's memory. You sing saints into sleep, work songs slowed to cradle tempo, little rhymes that smuggle chores into comfort. A refrain, soft repeated, becomes the room's heartbeat. Even fathers who don't sing hum by accident when the second watch wears thin. The music edits worry into watchfulness, a practical magic as old as rushes. In that hush you can hear medieval sex and love becoming something sturdier than flirtation. Two people keeping the same promise at 2 a.m. Colic, teething, and the small tyrannies arrive on schedule. Remedies live in the herb wallet. Dill for bellies, chamomile for moods, clove rubbed sparingly on gums. An amulet might dangle, a wolf tooth, a coral bead, not because you've abandoned sense, but because courage sometimes needs a prop. Priests may arch brows. Most look the other way if the household keeps the greater decencies. It's another truce between church control of intimacy and the village's practical theology. Does the child settle? Yes? Then carry on. Godparents don't retire after baptism. They report for duty. A godmother brings broth on fever days and buys the child's first decent shoes. A godfather teaches the difference between a promise and a boast. They're backup candles when parental wicks burn low. In legal storms, inheritance, guardianship, their names anchor the page. Here the church structure widens the safety net in useful ways, translating sacrament into errands, and polishing everyday conjugal life with extra hands. Weaning is a slow negotiation with spoons and seasons. Paps, bread or grain softened in broth or milk, arrive first, then mashed roots, then whatever the garden will spare. Spoilage is a real villain. Cleanliness becomes strategy rather than luxury. A scalded bowl, a rinsed cloth, a mother's nose deciding which pot deserves trust. This is sanitation at a century's edge. When it goes well, you don't notice. When it goes badly, everyone learns the price of haste. Not every crib stays full. Bedboards toll like bells when the worst happens, and the house rearranges around absence. Grief has its bedchamber norms. Candles low, linen changed often, neighbours guarding the door against curiosity, and its slow repair, walks when the light is kind, work that tires but doesn't fray. A priest who knows when to bless and when to be quiet. Couples bend or break here. The ones who bend share the load of memory and do not weaponize the night. Desire versus doctrine finds its truest purpose when it teaches mercy to people who have run out of it. As months pass, the child makes the house a school. Small hands at the kneading trough, a giggle that edits the worst day, a stare that forces adults to justify their cranky logic. Courtship customs reappear as parlor games for tiny students. And yes, the couple finds time again, not in grand gestures, but in reclaimed minutes once the lamp is out. The bed becomes a parliament of whispered plans, proving marriage life is built from unglamorous, repeating votes for each other. Ready to step into the wider village and see how law, rumor, and temptation tested that loyalty, adultery courts, church penances, and the thin line between flirt and fine. Picture a chill morning in the church court. Damp stone, beeswax candles, a clerk's quill whispering like a guilty conscience. On the bench sits a canon lawyer who has read more hearts than harvest ledgers, flanked by neighbors sworn to tell the truth even if it belongs to their cousin. This is where medieval sex and love gets audited. The case is rarely raw. They rustle, letters found, kisses witnessed, doors that closed too late. Law doesn't try to read minds. It reads patterns. Meetings after compline, gifts without occasion, footprints where snow says nobody should have walked. The line between flirt and offence is thinner than parchment. A hand lingering too long during a dance, a private walk, to discuss wool prices, a ribbon swapped without parents or priest as witness, alone, trivial, together, a constellation. Communities went puritanical so much as protective. Seduction wasn't just sin. It threatened dowries, inheritances, and the fragile peace of everyday conjugal life. So people learned social breaks. You laughed with your eyes, not your hands. You let your shadow keep you honest when moonlight felt persuasive. Evidence smelled like wax and bread. Affection notes appeared rolled in spice jars, hidden under loaves tucked into shoe linings. A neighbor swore she heard giggles through the timber. A servant admitted he accidentally barred the door from outside. Courts didn't need drama. They needed two converging facts and a timeline that didn't creak. When church control of intimacy worked well, it felt less like a whip and more like a scarecrow, visible enough to keep trouble from landing in the first place. Penances came in flavors. For Rumo with thin legs, alms, a public apology, a short fast that trained the tongue to behave. For proven adultery, bare feet at the church door, ash on the brow. A procession that tasted like humility. The goal wasn't humiliation, it was reintegration. Desire versus doctrine got a negotiated settlement. Yes, you crossed the line. No, we won't leave your children stranded with your mistake. In towns that prized bread over vendettas, mercy was an investment with compound interest. Men found the bench too. A boast in a tavern could become paperwork by morning. A steward's wife deserved more than a wink and a shrug. If a husband slandered his wife with careless accusations, he might be ordered to make amends in coin and contrition. The law, biased as any era, still understood one thing. Peace in marriage life lowers taxes for everyone. Courts defended the quiet work of kitchens and cradles, because without that work, markets made bad music. Not every complaint aimed at beds. Some targeted the stage before the bed, secret promises made with no witnesses, gifts that looked like traps, courtship customs bent into pressure. Canonists repeatedly hammered the rule. A vow extracted by fear or fraud could be unstitched, even if the gossip already had a name for your future children. The church could be nosy, yes, but on its best day it guarded the poor from rich charm and saved girls from eloquent disasters. Neighbors policed with cookware when courts were slow. Charivari. Pots, pans, masked singers, shamed a spouse who broke vows, a couple who laughed too loudly at grief, or a mismatched pair that smelled of gold more than goodwill. Crude? Choked. Absolutely. Effective? Often. The racket forced a reckoning before bitterness calcified. Afterwards, a priest would broker a truce. Gifts to the poor, an earnest apology, and a quiet season where bedchamber norms were kindness first, performance later. Reconciliation wasn't romance. It was carpentry. Couples rebuilt trust with schedules, not sonnets, doors left open by choice, errands done together, a ledger of reliable behaviors. Midwives and aunts became counselors before there were counselors. Bring her water before your defense, one might say, and count the pots you've filled, not the speeches you've made. In everyday conjugal life, love returns on the same path as chores. Sometimes, though, the bridge couldn't hold. Official separation, rare but real, might assign beds, bread, and debts. Annulment dissected vows to see if they were ever valid. Kin too close, promises made while drunk with grief or drink. Even then, the goal was structural fairness. Keep children fed, keep tempers cool, keep neighbors from picking sides like a festival sport. Medieval sex and love didn't pretend heartbreak was fiction. It tried to keep heartbreak from bankrupting the street. Temptation had favorite theaters, holiday fairs, pilgrim roads, warm kitchens after long days. The counter-rituals were simple and unsentimental. Travel in company, speak where others can hear. Priests preached fences, grandmothers preached recipes and early bedtimes. Together they understood that desire versus doctrine is easier at 9 p.m. than at midnight. Easier after stew than after songs, easier when boots are dry and blankets are honest. Language saved marriages more often than law did. You're all right, I was careless. I miss you. Let's fix the week, not the century. Please don't joke like that when the baker's wife can hear. Small promises, kept. Relit rooms that had gone grey. A couple who mastered quiet apologies didn't need a court date. That's the hidden success metric of church control of intimacy. Not punishments on the books, but fewer reasons to open the books at all. Hold this closing image. A corridor at dusk, one candle, two shadows moving in step again. Not because the poet visited, but because the schedule did. Next, we'll go deeper into the household playbook that kept loyalty from fraying, money jars and meal rhythms, separate tasks that dovetailed, and the unglamorous tenderness of sharing fatigue, how the economy of chores and the etiquette of rest turned marriage life from vow into habit without draining the spark. Ready to see how love survives laundry day? Start with a sound you can trust, a lid tapping a clay jar as coins settle after market. That jar decides tomorrow's mood more than any poem. In a good week you hear 3 notes. Rent, grain, a little what if. In a lean one you hear one heavy thud and a lot of hope. This is where everyday conjugal life actually lives, not in sonnets but in ledgers kept in flour dust. You and your partner learn to speak in prices and promises, and somehow keep the tone warm. In medieval sex and love, affection shows up first as someone counting carefully. Meals are meetings with steam. Morning is oats and quiet. Midday is bread that remembers heat. Evening is a bowl that makes the room agree. Rhythm matters. Soak beans before dawn, salt late, taste twice, serve once. You plate generosity in the first ladle and prudence in the second. The secret is that marriage life runs on calories and cadence. The person who times the fire is doing diplomacy. Add one joke over the pot and you've balanced the kingdom. Work divides like water follows slope by strength, skill, season. He hauls, she kneads. She barters, he mends. Both switch hats when weather mocks plans. You don't chase fairness with a ruler. You chase it with a clock and a conscience. The rule is simple. No one goes to bed angrier than their back feels. That's how bedchamber norms begin at noon. Tired but respected bodies are kinder in the dark than pampered ones full of speeches. Laundry day is the village's truth serum. Rushes get shaken, shirts get blued, reputations get aired with the linens. There's choreography here. Hot water first, ash or lye, exactly long enough, rinse where the stream forgives, dry where wind behaves. You learn which stain needs elbow and which needs time. These are not chores. They are the valves that keep desire versus doctrine from turning into desire versus dirt. Clean sheets are theology you can nap in. Fuel is winter's accountant. Wood stacked high is romance in slow motion. Peat cut and drying is a love letter from July to January. You bank the fire like savings, Let coals hold hands under ash, and teach children the difference between warm and waste. A hearth that survives the week without stealing from the next one is how church control of intimacy quietly wins. Sundays feel like rest because Monday didn't panic. Piety tastes better when the room doesn't shiver. Tools are tempers with handles. A dull knife starts 3 arguments before noon. A wobbly stool invents a 4th. You keep edges honest, legs tightened, broom bristles spared for feast days, and suddenly your house stops picking fights. It's amazing how many quarrels end when the hinge stops squeaking. The quiet thesis of everyday conjugal life is maintenance. Fix the thing, save the hour, rescue the mood, repeat. Market days are theatre with receipts. You walk in clean, speak like you've slept, and leave with less coin. Haggle is neighbourly when done with compliments, cruel when done with pride. You remember which stall sells honest salt, and which stall sells stories in bottles. Bring a sprig of mint for breath and a ribbon for luck, and you've practiced courtship customs without leaving the onion aisle. Charm used for bread, not boasting. Rest has etiquette. You don't steal naps. You schedule them, even if schedule is just a nod and a blanket near the warm wall. On feast eves you quit early so tomorrow doesn't taste like regret. On fast days you downshift so tempers don't eat what meals don't offer. This is bedchamber norms at their wisest. The night forgives if the afternoon stopped on time. The room reads your mercy to yourself and decides to be merciful back. Sickness audits your systems. Who knows where the broth lives, which herb helps which ache, how to move the bed closer to heat without making a parade. You rehearse the drill before you need it. Air the room 2 fingers, trim the wick, pin a cloth where fever won't undo it. The parish may talk doctrine, but your house practices trage. In real marriage life, tenderness is logistics you rehearsed when nobody was watching. Children rearrange every graph. Chores become lessons with smaller hands inside them. Errands become adventures narrated at knee height. You slow to their stride without losing the day. They learn that love is a broom, passed with a smile and a story, not a sermon on Sunday. This is medieval sex and love aging well. Desire turned into a workplace where everyone gets paid in warmth and jokes. Money jars multiply meaning. One is for rent, one for flour, one for woo, we're kind today. A coin you drop after a hard moment handled well. It's corny and it works. On weeks when coins are shy, you add pebbles and the sound still cheers you. That tiny ritual keeps desire versus doctrine from becoming a tally of sins. It becomes a tally of effort. People fall in love with effort. They stay for it too. And when the sun slips, you see how the arithmetic fed the affection. A swept floor becomes a smoother goodnight. A mended hinge becomes a quieter laugh. A stacked woodpile becomes a warmer yes. You didn't win the day with a grand gesture. You trimmed a wick and spared 3 nerves. Tomorrow we'll throw new math, taxes, storms, cousins, but you've got a method now. Next, let's widen the circle to the in-laws, neighbors, and guild brothers who share your walls and your business. The politics of proximity where loyalty gets tested at the well, at the bake oven, and at the parish door, and how church control of intimacy tried to keep peace when love had too many witnesses. Start at the well when news is drawn up with the water. Buckets clack, ropes squeals, and someone casually asks how late your candle burned. That's the daily parliament, where everyday conjugal life is inspected by people who swear they're just thirsty. You learn the art of friendly vagueness, answers that sound like smiles. In medieval sex and love, privacy isn't a door. It's a skill, performed with posture, timing, and the right number of words. In-laws arrive like weather fronts, sometimes warm, sometimes dramatic. A mother-in-law can be a second midwife or a second magistrate. A father-in-law can teach the price of grain or the price of pride. The trick is to turn kin into crew. Invite advice before it arrives uninvited, credit them loudly when it helps, and redirect gently when it doesn't. That's how marriage life keeps households from becoming courtrooms. You're not suppressing personality, you're choreographing it. Shared ovens make neighbors into stakeholders. On bake day, heat is a commons and patience a sacrament. You cue dough. Trade gossip like small change, and watch whose loaves burn when tempers do. A well-timed compliment can rescue a grudge. A loaned appeal can end a cold war. This is community maintenance disguised as chores, and it protects courtship customs long after the wedding, because people are kinder to lovers who kept the oven schedule. Guilds stitch your reputation to your work. A steady hand at the bench earns you better clients and gentler rumors. A sloppy joint or late delivery teaches a different chorus. Masters notice whether your face reads rested or resentful. Apprentices copy your stride. Some halls post ordinances on tavern hours and feast attendance, a soft extension of church control of intimacy that keeps roofs over families. Work ethic becomes a marital asset. Less flowers, more flour. Festivals test borders. Dancing greens turn into unscripted auditions. Gully lengthens compliments into mistakes. You survive with simple protocols. Dance near people who know your story. Praise the music louder than the bodies. Leave before your posture starts lying. Desire versus doctrine wins by daylight planning, not midnight heroics. And yes, carry mint, because breath is diplomacy. Walls are thin, so partnerships learn code. A cough that means the beadle is outside. A knock that means my aunt. A chair move that means we're not hosting tonight. Bedchamber norms leak into common space as small, polite signals that keep affection from becoming public theatre. Neighbors appreciate not being drafted as extras in your domestic play. You appreciate mornings without commentary. Loans and tools bind fates. You borrow a plowshare, they borrow your ladder. Suddenly your calendar shares a pulse with theirs. Paying back early is romance disguised as arithmetic. Returning sharper than you borrowed is flirtation with the whole lane. Households that honor tools usually honor spouses because both break under entitlement. That's everyday conjugal life learned at the workbench. When they happen, must be staged like surgery. Take the long walk by the hedgerow. Keep voices at psalm, not market. Decide what the wind looks like before the first sentence leaves the dock. If you can't solve it, schedule it. After Vespers, not now. The parish may preach peace, but you practice it with clocks. That's marriage life being merciful to future you. Hospitality is your brand. One ladle for the hungry traveler, one chair by the warm wall. A towel that smells faintly of rosemary. These become public proof that your love makes room for others. The village trusts couples who can feed without boasting and refuse without shaming. Medieval sex and love grows deeper when it lifts outsiders briefly. Generosity acts like a hinge that keeps heavy doors moving. Rumor patrol requires choreography. When a story points at your house, you answer with light and labor. If a slander clings, you recruit witnesses who already like telling the truth. Midwives, stewards, godparents. Courts exist, but the better cure is a year of consistent mournings. Here church control of intimacy helps by offering formal reconciliations that the street can applaud and move on. Alliances need rituals. Share ale on Saints' Eves, trade babysitting during harvest, show up with a hammer before you're asked. Write people into your calendar on purpose, and they'll edit your reputation with kindness when storms arrive. That's courtship customs reinvented for couples, anniversaries celebrated with the butcher's best cut, and the widow's favorite pie. Love widens its circle without losing its center. When the day ends, notice what worked. The borrowed peel returned clean, the joke that dissolved a neighbor's frown, the in-law who left smiling because you asked her to teach a stitch. These tiny victories keep rooms breathable. Next, we'll turn the lantern onto temptation's quieter cousin, absence. Travel or pilgrimages, seasonal labor. And how letters, tokens, and trusted go-betweens helped affection survive miles, without fraying the trust that desire versus doctrine fought so hard to build. You learn what absence tastes like the first morning you set an extra bowl back on the shelf. The house is the same. Brushes, kettle, the window 2 fingers open, but the air feels unsupervised. Seasonal hire pulls him toward fields that belong to other men. A guild summons you to a city where your craft finally fits. War or a pilgrimage steals a season with the speed of a rumor. In everyday conjugal life, miles become a third party in the marriage, and you answer them with choreography. Start with logistics that smell like beeswax and ink. Letters cost time, coin, and favors, so you plan. One page for news, one for weather, a line that says, "I slept," and one that says, "We're fine." The parish clerk may pen it if your hand wobbles. The guild brother adds a postscript if he's headed that way. Seals matter. Wax impressed with the housemark tells the messenger and the world that this isn't market gossip. In medieval sex and love, a sealed letter is a fence you can carry. Messengers are weather with boots. Some are paid. Many are just neighbors pointed in the right direction with food and a blessing. You pack the pouch the way you pack a prayer. You ask for a countersign at the far end. Tell her the cat has promoted himself, so forgery doesn't lie rent-free in your head. That's church control of intimacy at its most practical. Communities policing truth so affection isn't kidnapped by rumor. Keepsakes do the heavy lifting in the dark. A plain ring warms to the temperature of patience. A larkspur petal pressed in a psalter steals a smile from terrible days. A kerchief edged with a private stitch says, "I'm holding the corner you can't see." These small props aren't superstition. They're memory anchors. When desire versus doctrine starts its midnight debate, a good token ends it with the authority of fabric and thumb. Absence has a calendar, and it isn't kind. Harvest runs long, roads flood, captains lie about dates. You fight despair with milestones, when the barley's in, when St. Martin's geese fatten, when the frost leaves the bucket. You bake on the day you expected him anyway, because ritual is a ladder over disappointment. Marriage life survives on those ladders, small, repeatable, humble enough that luck can't knock them over. Jealousy is a draft that sneaks under every door. Travelers meet inns. Inns meet stories with faces. Your defense isn't oaths, it's witnesses. Write where you slept and with whom you worked. Send a line in someone else's hand to prove you weren't alone. Praise decent company by name. At home, you answer distance with daylight. Shutters wide, chores visible, neighbors folded into supper. Love does better when it has an audience for the right scenes. Pilgrimages deserve their own rulebook. A badge from Canterbury or Compostela isn't just tin, it's a passport of trust. You agree on alms to give, on relics to avoid buying, on which inns the parish knows. The return gift is modest. A scallop shell, a charm for the cradle, a story about rain that didn't win. Piety and longing take turns carrying the pack. In bedchamber norms, this translates to tenderness that resumes like a paused song, not a feast day trumpet. Or writes letters with mud. Dates blur, rumors gallop, and the best you can do is fold your day around the uncertainty without letting it eat the pantry. You keep a wan box, a clean shirt, a favorite joke written once and tucked away, a small coin saved for the welcome that buys you both time to breathe. You also keep a I if not drawer, because courage is cruel without paperwork. The priest helps with wills. The midwife helps with hope. Medieval sex and love isn't naive, it's stubborn with style. Trust has a sound, steady boots in the lane, not a sprint to the door. When the traveller returns, you don't interrogate, you inventory, shoes off, hands washed, stories in order. You let the first evening be logistics and warmth. Questions live in the morning when kindness has sat down. Reunions break when people audition for the minstrel. They hold when people rehearse for laundry. That's the grown-up grammar of everyday conjugal life. Distance also invites temptations of inkier. Flirtation travels well on paper. So do lies. You inoculate the house by reading letters aloud when possible, by archiving praise and burning poison, by letting the godparents be your notaries of sanity. If something stings, you answer with facts and 2 witnesses, not heat. The same discipline that kept bands honest keeps absence from fermenting into melodrama. Courtship customs don't expire. They level up. Children measure miles with fingers. How many sleeps? You translate the road into bedtime arithmetic, 2 markets and a sermon. They draw pictures for the messenger, and sniff the returning cloak like hounds. You involve them in the calendar of hope, so it doesn't turn into the theatre of tantrum. A family that narrates absence together weathers it better. A family that hides it breeds ghosts. When the bags finally drop by the door and the dust settles into its old corners, you can feel the next chapter asking for a seat. Distance taught you to stage truth, to portion hope, to hire patience like staff. Now another frontier waits at the edge of common sense. Charms, potions, and whispered recipes that promise to bend hearts and heat beds. And the church predictable thunder in reply, ready to walk the thin line between harmless comfort and dangerous magic, where desire versus doctrine fought with herbs, candles, and very persuasive salesmen. Picture a crooked lane after vespers, shutters half closed, a brazier hissing in drizzle, and a peddler with a tray that smells like honey, vinegar, and trouble. He whispers of powders that warm cold hearts, knots that keep a husband steady, candles that drip in the shape of promises. In the world of medieval sex and love, hope had vendors. You weren't just buying a bottle. You were renting a story where fear lost. The church called it sortilegium. Your anxious aunt called it just in case, and somewhere between those two names lay a very human desire to make affection behave. Start with herbs that had good press and better memories. Rosemary for fidelity, rue against envy, vervain to make words land, yarrow to steady nerves before a talk that mattered. None of these were miracle keys. Most were placebos with pleasant scents and a talent for calming hands. Still, behavior follows belief. A sprig tucked in a bodice might remind you to speak kindly. A sachet in a pillow might remind him to sleep rather than sulk. That's the honest algebra of everyday conjugal life. Props that nudge people toward their better selves. Then came the dangerous promises. Antherides. The infamous Spanish fly was hawked as a spark for cold ash. In reality, it's a bladder-shredding poison that turned romance into an emergency. Henbane clouded judgment more than it warmed affection. Mandrake was more legend than leverage. Medieval consumers went fools. Many knew the risks, which is why most love potions were wine, honey, and theatre. If a recipe bragged, a wise buyer backed away. In the tug between desire versus doctrine, survival should always win. Magic, by geometry, tried to skip chemistry. Wax figures pricked with pins, names scratched on bread, baked at odd hours, knots tied in threads and untied at dawn to loosen a stubborn heart. The point wasn't physics, it was rehearsal. As you tied the knot, you practiced patience. As you baked the name, you remembered what he likes besides being right. Even when results were entirely psychological, the rituals sometimes worked because the participants became gentler to live with. Rituals that domesticate tempers deserve more respect than sermons that don't. Divination had a friendlier face than sorcery. Girls fasted on St. Agnes Eve to dream their future spouse. Midsummer fires tempted people to throw herbs and read the crackle. Apple peels shaped letters on cottage floors. Most of this lived under play rather than peril, especially when kept in daylight and good humor. Courtship customs borrowed these moments as icebreakers. A joking omen could become a real conversation about dowries, distances, and what kind means when the grain runs low. Perfume stood with one foot in pharmacy, one in theatre. Musk, if you could afford its scandalous price, smelled like risk. Rosewater read as clean and conscientious. Lavender was the patron saint of I tried today. Scent didn't manufacture affection, but it did frame it, and frames matter when houses are small and winters long. You didn't drown a room, you edited it. In marriage life, the person who understands framing, light, air, temperance with the bottle, the church's position was not a flat no, despite the pamphlet reputation. Confessors distinguished between harmless comforts and manipulative coercion. Herb tea to relax? Find .e. A lie in a bottle that bypassed consent? Sin with a capital S. sometimes prosecuted as beneficium poisoning in secular courts. Priests warned that love coaxed is blessing. Love tricked is theft. That's church control of intimacy at its best, drawing a line where dignity lives while admitting that anxious hearts will always hunt for shortcuts. Cunning folk, the local experts in things, occupied a grey lane between healer and heretic. Many were midwives with extra recipes. Many were old men with gardens and good ears. They sold practical mixtures, fennel for nerves, dill for belly, wrapped in a little theatre that made courage easier to swallow. They also refused the worst requests. A skilled wise woman knew how to prescribe a talk, a sachet plus instructions to walk at dusk and speak 3 kindnesses before the sachet worked. You see the trick. Magic redirected into manners is simply therapy in another dialect. Charms also functioned as oaths in miniature. A ring blessed on a saint's day, a ribbon knotted while making a promise aloud, a candle shared at the same flame. These acted like pocket contracts. When a quarrel threatened to become a sport, the token on the shelf reminded both of the last time they were wise. The most successful spells were just physical reminders to keep vows humans had already decided to keep. The least successful tried to manufacture consent with stagecraft, and got exactly what stagecraft produces. Markets police themselves more than we give them credit for. A charlatan who sold headaches often found his stall empty by Michaelmas. A discreet apothecary who sold honest rose water and never smirked at blushes did brisk trade year after year. Guilds posted rules against fraudulent ingredients. Ecclesiastical courts fined those who mixed sacraments with superstitions. Communities learned, as communities do, to prefer predictable decency over glitter. In medieval sex and love, reputation was the only advertisement that couldn't be faked for long. Why did people keep buying hope? Because they were trying to repair asymmetry without starting a war. One partner cold, the other heartsore. One timid, the other weary. One jealous, the other exhausted. Bottles promised to edit the other person. The wiser path edited the situation. Better timing, kinder breath, more sleep. Potions fade. Habits stick. The smartest households poured wine, not filters, and then fixed the hinge, the schedule, and the tone of their good night. Hold this gentler conclusion. Affection is a garden, not a switch. Herbs can soothe it. Scents can frame it. Tokens can remind it. Only behavior sustains it. Which leads us naturally to the next, less mystical engine of intimacy, conversation with professionals. Priests, confessors, and even savvy stewards often operated as marriage coaches before such a job had a name, ready to step into the confessional and the hall bench, where whispered counsel, practical penances, and household ordinances turn fragile desire into durable peace, without a single drop of dragon's blood. Open a wooden door that smells of beeswax and damp wool, and you'll find the century's quietest marriage clinic. A confessional, a bench, a clerk with ink on his thumb. In this room, church control of intimacy doesn't rule. It translates. The priest listens for what's sin and what's weather, for what's malice and what's Monday. He's less a judge than metronome, tapping time back into hearts that forgot the beat. In medieval sex and love, the best counsel begins with a kettle, a chair near the warm wall, and the sentence, "Tell me when you last slept." Good confessors practice triage. If a quarrel is really hunger, he prescribes soup. If silence is really shame, he prescribes a walk at dusk and 3 sentences that must be said before compline. Penances come salted with practicality. Fewer cups, more water. Fewer boasts, more sweeping. The advice aims to stabilize everyday conjugal life first, then fine-tune doctrine. Nobody mends a lute during a storm. He also guards boundaries with a shepherd's firmness. Consent isn't a garnish, it's bread. When a spouse tries to weaponize the marital debt, the better priests pull the ledger away and talk mutuality, gentleness and safety. Where danger lives, scars, threats, bruises, he becomes a courier, carrying names to stewards and kin who can intervene. That's desire versus doctrine at its most honest. Doctrine defending desire, not overruling it. Calendars get rewritten in pencil, not stone. Lenten feast days matter, but so do lambing harvest, recovery after childbirth, and the thin weeks when candles run out. A priest might map a couple's seasons with the tact of a gardener. Bedchamber norms aren't annulled. They're adapted so the morning doesn't punish the evening. The goal is durable kindness. Then there's the household constitution, lists hung by pantries and remembered by stewards. Windows 2 fingers at dawn, linen on third days, mint at the basin on market eves. These humble ordinances keep rooms breathable, which keeps tempers brief, which keeps marriage life safer than sermons alone can manage. A tidy threshold prevents 3 arguments a week. That's not glamour. That's architecture. Aunts and midwives double as counsellors in plain clothes. Their office is a stool by the hearth, their retainer paid in broth and secrets. When a couple's words snag, the aunt assigns a chore done in company. When sleep is losing, a midwife prescribes rosemary water and a pact to stop talking by the second bell. The advice sounds homespun because it is. Soften for long roads and thin winters. Language drills are part of the toolkit. Confessors and stewards teach phrases like tools. I'm tired, not distant. After Vespers, not now. Tell me the smallest truth first. Couples rehearse them when calm, so they exist when heat arrives. Sentence that opens a door is worth 6 apologies made too late. In everyday conjugal life, rhetoric saves laundry. People underestimate that and pay with linen. Jealousy gets protocols, not poetry. If one travels, letters are read aloud to a witness. Tokens sit where both can see them, and reunions follow a sequence. Shoes wash, food, words. If rumors bite, shutters open, chores go visible, godparents visit. Confession blesses these procedures because they flood shadows with daylight. Church control of intimacy works best when it trains villagers, not just couples, to recognize honest patterns. Edge cases need special maps. Infertility gets herbs and gentler expectations. Injury gets rearranged furniture and timelines. Unequal appetites get schedules that protect dignity. Counselors frame changes as seasons, not verdicts. So desire versus doctrine feels like a partnership with time, not a fight with fate. The leitmotif returns. Open the window 2 fingers. Let air, light, and mercy work while you work. City guilds add their footnotes. Curfews, feast attendance, and tavern rules. Nip trouble before it rents space in kitchens. Masters quietly reward journeymen whose faces look rested, whose wives aren't living in court corridors. Policy props up privacy. Fewer midnight epics, more predictable evenings. Marriage life thrives when workdays land on time. Why did all this work? Predictability lowers fear, and fear is what turns small frictions into large fires. The confessor's calendar, the steward's list, the aunt's proverb, together they convert passion into rhythm. Boring becomes a compliment. Your house is boring the way a sturdy bridge is boring. The paradox is gorgeous. Order makes room for play. Medieval sex and love hides its wildest joys inside well-kept routines. Keep the picture as a lantern for what's next. When counsel failed or succeeded, the culture kept receipts. Now we'll walk onto the makeshift stages, streets, greens, and church porches, where jokes, fabliaux, and moral drama taught crowds how to behave when nobody was looking. Ready to hear how public laughter disciplined private heat without a single statute. Start on the market green at fair time, a rough plank for a stage, a fiddler testing strings, ale breathing out of mugs, and children orbiting the action like small moon. What comes next looks like fun and sounds like noise, but it's civic pedagogy with a drum. The players promise spectacle. The town quietly buys guidelines. In that bright hour, Medieval sex and love is turned inside out, so everyone can examine the seams and laugh without getting singed. Fabio, the cheeky verse tales, arrive with elbows out. Greedy monk, a wily wife, a braggy miller, the punchlines land, the lesson sticks. These stories aren't blue for sport. They're warning labels wrapped in rye bread. Want to thrive in everyday conjugal life? Don't be the fool who thinks wit can outrun witnesses. Communities let the laughter do what statutes couldn't. Shame excess, protect the shy, and remind the clever that doors have hinges for a reason. Miracle and mystery plays answer within sense and order. On church porches and scaffold stages, Joseph learns patience, Mary models steadiness, and crowds absorb choreography for marriage life without a single lecture. When desire meets delay, the plays preach dignity. When jealousy whispers, they stage a counterspell called trust. You're entertained, yes, but you're also walked kindly through desire versus doctrine until the two can share a bench. Between these poles sits moral interlude, short, punchy, and portable. A personified lust struts. Modesty rolls her eyes. Patience outlasts everybody. The jokes are clean enough for children and pointed enough for drunks. The message: you don't need heroics, you need habits. Audiences leave with shared catchphrases that resurface at home when bedchamber norms and tempers are negotiating the night. Arrival. The pot-banging parade turns satire into municipal service. A mismatched remarriage too soon after a funeral. A neighbor flaunting an open secret. A spouse who forgot promises. Out come the pans, masks, and rhymes sharp as nettles. Crude? Definitely. Effective? Often. The racket converts rumor into a short ritual and an exit ramp, so households can rejoin the lane without years of slow poison. Social comedy, in other words, as crowd-sourced courtship customs enforcement. Proverbs and riddles do their work between shows. Two fires make a kitchen fierce, warns against dueling pride. A closed mouth keeps warm, protects privacy when walls are thin. Young people trade word games that smuggle consent lessons inside wit. Sayings that teach when to step back, how to say no while saving face, and why loiter is sometimes the most loving word in medieval sex and love. Dances teach with feet what sermons attempt with syllables. Circle steps keep hands where everyone can see them. Partner changes make sure no one is cornered. Pauses built into the tune allow polite exits. If you want to understand how church control of intimacy governed without handcuffs, watch the reeve smile when the fiddler chooses a set that enforces distance at ale's third cup. The music isn't just melody. It's municipal design. Satire spares no collars. Clergy who preach fire and shop for perfume get roasted. Merchants who tithe loudly and cheat quietly get rhymed into humility. The crowd learns a crucial stance. Mock hypocrisy. Protect sincerity. That stance helps couples at home. Are we living the thing or performing it? And helps the parish hold the line without turning love into paperwork. Laughter used wisely lowers the temperature so advice can land. Carnival provides the pressure valve. Misrule inverts ranks, masks loosen tongues, and the town tries on chaos for one supervised afternoon. Then, crucially, the masks come off, the brooms return, and Lent arrives like a cool cloth. The cycle lets people air the ache without burning the house. It's desire versus doctrine as rhythm. Permission, pause, doesn't grind itself down. Images amplify the script. Woodcuts pasted on tavern walls show the world turned upside down. A wife beating a devil with a ladle. A husband tied to the cradle. Exaggerations that invite grins and boundary checks. Marginal doodles in prayer books wink at readers who already know better. Visual jokes train reflexes. We laugh, then we straighten the chair, soften the voice, adjust the veil. A picture can make a rule memorable without sounding like a scold. Players and guilds negotiate lines backstage. A guild master edits out a verse that hits too close to a patron. A priest blesses a scene after the biggest boast is trimmed. Licensing, fines, and playbooks create a living censorship that aims for decency without murdering delight. The result shows that households can quote safely at supper, turning performance into portable advice for marriage life and bedchamber norms. Most important, these crowd scripts invite participation. You heckle the hypocrite, repeat the refrain, and carry a joke home as a gentle nudge when tempers rise. Public laughter becomes a toolkit, a phrase that diffuses pride, a dance step that rescues a bad corner, a proverb that replaces a shout. Little by little, a town learns how to keep affection sturdy under rain, which sets us up for the quieter evidence, the private letters, court depositions, and household notebooks where real voices admit what the stage could only hint, ready to eavesdrop, respectfully, on the paper trail of medieval sex and love, where truth shows up in ink stains and crossed out lines. Open a chest that smells of oak and candle wax, and you'll find a century whispering in ink. Letters folded like little doors, scraps pricked with sewing pins, margins crowded by notes that look like they were written while a kettle sang. This is where medieval sex and love stops being rumor and becomes handwriting. The surprise isn't the passion. It's the logistics. Who carried the page, who could read it, who stood nearby while words that wanted to be private had to be spoken aloud by a clerk with clean nails and excellent memory. A love letter in this world is equal parts breath and bookkeeping. You report wheat and weather before you risk one line about missing the sound of a latch. You thank the godmother for broth, promise to mend the fence, and tuck a pressed sprig between sentences as if scent could notarize truth. Seals matter. A blob of wax carries your mark and your reputation. A broken seal carries a story you didn't authorize. Paper makes everyday conjugal life visible to people who should, ideally, mind their own business, and often don't. Not all ink is tender. Church courts keep depositions that smell of damp stone and anxiety. On Tuesday at dusk, she saw. And there goes your evening turned into evidence. A neighbor swears to a laugh through timber. A servant remembers the clink of a belt dropped too near a door. The judge doesn't hunt romance, he hunts timelines. Church control of intimacy isn't romance's enemy here so much as rumor's bouncer. If a story will live in the lane for years, it must at least be coherent. House books, those neat lists by pantry and bench, are the unsung literature of the bedchamber. Windows, 2 fingers at dawn. Linen changed on 3rd day. Mint before market. The ink is small, the mercy large. These ordinances keep people from inventing crimes because the room smells like stew, not salt. When quarrels happen, a steward can point to the line that would have prevented it. Call that the quiet poetry of bedchamber norms. Not I love you, but I aired the sheets. Occasionally, a marginal doodle gives the game away. A little heart sketched in a ledger near the salt ration. A looping initial in the margin of a psalter where a couple always knelt. These aren't confessions, they're breadcrumbs. Historians love them because they show marriage life as it truly runs, between chores, under vows, across seasons. A flourish on the day the banns were read. A smudge on the day the baby arrived. The book keeps its face straight and still tells you everything. Petitions to lords and city councils expose love's economics. Widows ask for dower due. Husbands beg remission of fines for a charivari they swear they didn't start. Wives request that a soldier's delayed pay arrive before the bread does not. Paper turns emotion into requests the world can satisfy. When desire versus doctrine becomes desire versus tax, ink is how you hire allies. A well-phrased petition can rescue a household faster than a poem. Guild minutes and fines show the social perimeter. Journeyman absent at matins on account of ale. Apprentice caught whispering behind the divats. These notes aren't gossip. They're weather reports for the street where your marriage breathes. If a partner is always late, the minutes say more than love ever wanted to admit. Conversely, a year of punctuality reads like flowers. In courtship customs, tokens promised steadiness. In guild books, steadiness is measured. Confessional registers, when they survive, have the driest words and the warmest implications. Reconciled with spouse, swore to avoid tavern on eves, advised to sleep more during harvest. You can feel the pastoral hand behind the pen, translating thunder into chores. Church control of intimacy at its best looks like this. Not spectacle, but schedules. Someone wrote it down so someone else could keep it. We also get the rough music of slander cases. A wife sues a neighbor for calling her too friendly. A man drags a rival in for claiming his banns were a sham. The remedy is often public apology on a set day with specific witnesses, a kind of legal mouthwash. Paper lets reputations bathe and re-enter the lane. It's messy, yes, but it makes everyday conjugal life survivable when tongues forget their harness. Travel letters carry the ache of miles. I slept at the miller's. Your cousin sends pears. Tell the child I kept the ribbon. A good traveller names companions and inns because trust travels slower than boots. A good home answers with inventories, not accusations. The roof held. The mint grows. Come by St. Lou. That exchange is intimacy engineered across distance, medieval sex and love, proving it can outlast logistics, as long as both sides write like adults. The most devastating ink, wills and guardianship clauses that speak softly about bad luck. If I do not return by Martinmas, let the godfather hold the key to the grain chest. It's not romance, and yet it is the most sacrificial kind, in which love arranges the room for a world where it isn't standing in it. Paper turns courage into instruction. That's marriage life, loving forward. Gather these scraps, and you get a portrait the painter's never finished. Tenderness that counts coins. Jealousy reduced by daylight, jokes in margins, and rules that keep touch generous. If the stage taught crowds how to behave, the archive shows how they actually did. Now let's step from paper back into flesh and blood evenings, festivals, fasts, and bedroom truces under winter roofs, to watch how ritual seasons tugged at craving, and how couples rewrote the calendar, so desire versus doctrine didn't tear the house in two. Step outside at dawn and smell the year. Wet wool in March, bread and smoke in November, apples arguing with rain in late September. In the world of medieval sex and love, the calendar wasn't backdrop. It was a referee with a bell. Saints' days, market fairs, sowing and harvest, Advent and Lent. Each one tugged the sleeve of appetite and told it when to walk and when to sit. Couples didn't merely feel the seasons. They planned like generals. If you've ever scheduled a date around payday and weather, you already speak their language. Feast days arrived like bright music. Candles multiplied, tables stretched, ale loosened sentences, and neighbors measured you next to your best self. Public cheer made courtship customs safer. Dancing in circles, hands in view, exits built into the tune. After the last drum beat, a good couple walked home early, traded jokes in low voices, and saved the kiss for the threshold. That's the quiet wisdom of everyday conjugal life. Don't make tomorrow apologize for tonight. Fasts did the opposite. They lowered the room's volume and asked for plainer plates and shorter boasts. Church control of intimacy drew a fence around nights. Not forever, not cruelly, just enough to remind bodies they weren't the only citizens in the house. Smart households treated fasts like maintenance days. Clothes mended, hinges oiled, tempers aired, 2 fingers of window wider. Oddly, restraint often made tenderness easier when permission came back. Scarcity sharpens gratitude. Winter remixed the marriage. Darkness arrived early and brought a suitcase. Cold that bit fingers. Jaws that slowed. Neighbors who smelled like wood smoke and survival. Bedchamber norms adapted without speeches. Warm stone at the foot of the bed. A second blanket stolen from the bench. Breath sweetened with mint, so closeness didn't earn distant. The room wasn't a stage. It was a shelter. You learned to trade heat like currency, and to spend words sparingly, as if they could break like ice. Spring flirted with everyone. Sap rose, boots found mud, and work shouted louder than ballads. In that chaos, marriage life survived on choreography. Sewing before sighing, soup before speeches, and bedtime when the stars said so, not when pride did. The couples who thrived praised each other's stamina out loud. Good hands today. And let compliments do the work perfumes try to do when money is loud and bees aren't yet awake. Summer tested patience by blessing you with company. Roads thawed. Pilgrims, peddlers, and cousins invented reasons to knock. Hospitality served as both shield and sieve. A clean basin, a ladle of ale, a stool near the warm wall proved you weren't hiding anything. A few words, a firm bed. In medieval sex and love, the bed stayed loyal to the house that defended its hours. Harvest was the gauntlet. Grain doesn't wait, and neither does weather. Night shortened into collapses. Affection became logistics. Water by the door, clean shift laid out, a promise to end the field work while there was still light to be kind by. Desire versus doctrine took a practical truce. God first, granary second, we third. And nobody mistook the ranking for lack of love. If the year is a ship, harvest is the storm. You tie everything down and talk later. Advent whispered where feasts shout. Purple on the altar. Quiet on the tongue. Errands with purpose, but no parade. Couples did small repairs on the soul. Fewer cups, more walks, gentler goodnights. The best confessors framed it this way. Give each other the gift of an easier person to live with. Under church control of intimacy, that's the whole play. Make room for tenderness by trimming what wastes it. Lent drilled discipline into bones. It wasn't loveless. It was lucid. Simpler meals, shorter evenings, and the old practice of closing arguments early so morning could arrive without inheriting resentment. Everyday conjugal life kept its warmth by refusing to light fires it couldn't afford to feed. And when Easter finally broke like sunlight through a stubborn window, couples found themselves wealthier in the only coin that matters: unspent spite. Market calendars set the tempo of flirtation and fidelity. Fairs meant color, bargains, and 100 chances to make mistakes with your eyes. So households invented portable fences, errands done together, purchases logged out loud, praise aimed at craft rather than collars. Merchants knew it too. Honest smells, soap, leather, bread, beat heady clouds every time. Courtship customs matured into married manners that made markets safer for vows. The weather itself counseled the bed. Heat asked for patience and a basin. Frost asked for speed and layers. Rain wrote lullabies on thatch and taught couples to time conversation to thunder's cover. Bedchamber norms were not moral lectures. They were craft. Turn the body to the draught. Place the cradle between door and warmth. Speak like someone else might be sleeping on the other side of the wall, because someone probably was. Technique is not unromantic. It's how romance survives roofs. By year's end, you'd see the pattern. Feast and fast, plenty and pinch, crowds and quiet, the bell's advice and the heart's reply. You didn't conquer the calendar, you danced with it. And a good dance partner leaves you standing. Which sets up our next turn. What happens when the rhythm breaks? War, plague, or famine? How did couples rewrite the script under sirens only their century could hear? The first siren is silence. Birds go missing. Carts creak without chatter, and the lane tastes of iron. A levy is called, or a boarder sulks itself into arrows, and suddenly everyday conjugal life has to pack itself into a bundle. A shirt, a token, a schedule that promises to keep the hearth breathing. You don't say goodbye like a minstrel. You say, after Michaelmas, and you put the best spoon where the worst day can find it. In medieval sex and love, bravery starts with practical kindness. War edits manners before it edits maps. Courtship customs that kept flirtation tidy now become protocols for survival. Letters read aloud to witnesses. Names of companions logged in margins. A ring turned into an oath. You can touch when the sky lies. The household turns tactical. Water by the door. Grain hidden in a less obvious bin. Debts squared so gossip has fewer claws. Love doesn't perform. It distributes tasks and shuts the latch softly. Absence grows teeth when pay runs late. Marriage life responds with arithmetic and allies. Godparents check on boots and bread. The steward advances barley because he remembers your help last winter. The priest writes a letter that travels faster than rumor. Jealousy loses ground to logistics when a ledger can be shown. That's church control of intimacy acting as guardian, not gaoler. Protecting promises with paperwork and daylight. Then plague walks in without knocking, smelling of smoke and fear. Bells count faster than meals, doors learn to be shy. Bedchamber, norms pivot to triage. Linens changed more, visitors fewer, air widened by 2 fingers and then 2 more. Bodies that once asked for comfort now ask for mercy. Cool cloths, quiet. Tenderness becomes technical. You speak less, you wipe more, you keep breath decent so the healthy can endure the room. Grief choreographs the street. Charlie. Black cloth sobers color, processions shorten, incense thins to a thread. Weddings shrink to thresholds and whispered feasts. Banns are read to benches that answer with silence. Desire versus doctrine makes a truce in plague years. No theatrical penances, no indulgent revels, just the humble heroism of showing up with broth. You discover the romance of competent neighbors. Famine argues with everything. The landscape smells of old straw and stubborn hope. Soup rehearses how to be water. Couples learn the craft of dividing hunger from anger. Talk first, then eat. Never promise on an empty stomach. Let the small child choose his crust before adults start their negotiation. Everyday conjugal life survives on etiquette more than calories when cupboards echo. Mercy becomes caloric. Scarcity pushes people toward shortcuts, filters dicey loans, vows they can't keep. Here church control of intimacy draws hard lines gently. No tricking consent, no pawning what isn't yours, no promises made at midnight that collapse at noon. Instead, parish granaries, work shares, fasts that are organized rather than suffered. The confessional prescribes soup and schedule with theology on the side. Not all heroism wears mail. Wives defend roofs with ledgers. Husbands mend pride with buckets and patience. Midwives and aunts become air traffic control for crises. Who needs broth? Who needs bed? Who needs a nudge back from the tavern? In medieval sex and love, virility is sometimes just the courage to hold the routine when thunder sits in the rafters. The room believes the person who knows where the clean cloths live. Letters from the front arrive smelling of rain and animals. You practice a liturgy. Open in daylight, read with a witness, answer with facts before feelings so fear doesn't invent to play. Those kerchief, ribbon, a pressed leaf become little generators of stamina. Courtship customs aren't childish now. They're batteries. You wind them with small rituals, and they return the favor at midnight when the house creaks in a new accent. Reunions are not theater, they're audits. Shoes off, hands washed, stories in order, bed made honest. You let affection catch up to reality rather than outrun it and trip. The best marriage life understands that desire travels faster than trust. The first evening is logistics. The second is laughter. The third remembers songs. A wise couple gives the bridge time to hold before dancing on it. After the worst years, households keep some habits forever. Windows open 2 fingers by reflex. Water stands ready. The second jar labeled, "Neighbors," never runs truly empty. Children are taught where the letters slept, which spoon was lucky, why rosemary belongs both in stews and in courage. Desire versus doctrine leaves the debate club and enters the workshop. The rule is what kept you kind under pressure. And when peace finally remembers your street, the first feast tastes cautious, less ale, more gratitude, fewer boasts, more names said aloud with a bowed head. You notice the room chooses steady faces over shiny ones. Beauty is competence again, and kisses are short because chores finally got interesting. Next, we'll step into temptations that return with prosperity, taverns, tournaments, and traveling fairs. And watch how couples who survived sirens defended their calm when applause tried to buy it back. Ready to walk the bright edge where medieval sex and love meets noise without losing its nerve. The first sign of recovery isn't coin, it's music. A fiddler returns to the square. The baker risks a sugared crust. and the alehouse door learns to swing again. Prosperity invites noise, and noise invites tests. In everyday conjugal life, quiet is easy to defend during famine. The real discipline arrives when benches are full and stories wear perfume. You and yours need a plan. How long to stay? How loudly to laugh? Which table keeps your vows in your sightline? That's grown-up medieval sex and love, not suspicion choreography. Taverns are rumour engines with honest bread. The room smells of malt, tallow, wet wool, and secrets warming their hands. A clever couple treats the alehouse like a fair road. Enter together when possible, greet the keeper by name. Sit where your backs are safe and your words won't audition. Compliment loudly, confide quietly. Desire versus doctrine doesn't mean you never toast. It means you don't let toast rent the keys to your house. A makes compliments ambitious. A laugh held one heartbeat too long. A hand that lingers on a sleeve. Individually, together a constellation. So you borrow a small etiquette from courtship customs, the polite pivot. Praise the music, not the mouth. The story, not the figure. The craft of the cooper, not the curve of the cup. It's not prudery, it's aiming affection homeward while still being fun to talk to. Games test the spine as much as luck. Dice want noise, and noise wants witnesses to forget context. Play low, leave early, and keep losses boring. If someone insists on a round you didn't ask for, answer with bread. You'll be amazed how many bad ideas can't survive a loaf. This is marriage life in tavern form. Feed outcomes, starve temptations, thank the host. Tournaments return with sunlight. The field is a carnival of banners, horses, and people trying to remember how to behave under trumpets. Glory smells like leather and hot iron. Dust edits every sentence. You survive the spectacle by agreeing on signals. A ribbon moved one finger. Bedchamber norms start here at noon. If you protect each other's comfort in public, the night will write thank you notes. Pageants and processions are theatre with rules. Royal entries, saints' days, new guild banners, crowds tighten, eyes audit, and clothes compete. Modesty is not invisibility, it's control of the frame. Choose colors that forgive dust, shoes that forgive distance, and gestures that don't set traps. The best dressed in any century are those who look designed for the weather. That's church control of intimacy by way of municipal design. Public joy that doesn't pick pockets or vows. Traveling fairs are temptation in stalls. Spices, silks, bright knives, brighter eyes. You pack defenses that look like errands. A list written at breakfast. A budget that jingles in 3 purses. Compliments aimed at workmanship instead of bodies. Try samples, buy reputation. The stall that treats its apprentices well will probably treat your coin. And your marriage. That's everyday conjugal life voting with silver. Entertainers earn their supper by flirting with the edge. Jugglers, jonglers, storytellers with verses that skate close to heat, applause. You clap, you laugh, and you do not take souvenirs you can't explain to the godmother. Flirtation belongs on the stage when you paid admission. Off stage, it becomes paperwork. Even in medieval sex and love, the line is not prudish. It's portable sanity. Hospitality after noise is where couples win. Home by moon, water first, bread second, stories third. Then a small audit. Did we spend more warmth on strangers than on each other? No self-scolding, just an adjustment for next time. Desire versus doctrine lives happily with debriefs. They turn experience into routine. A house that talks instead of stews survives festivals with energy in the bank. Confession works as maintenance, not mop-up. A priest who knows the season will ask how many nights ended late, how many coins exceeded their chores, whether any compliments tried to set up residence. Penances become practical. Skip the next tavern eve, bring broth to the widow you ignored at the green sleep. When church control of intimacy succeeds, it sounds like good coaching. Prosperity also buys privacy tools. A better latch, thicker curtains, a second blanket that keeps warmth where kindness needs it. You're not hiding sin. You're investing in calm. Bedchamber norms are sweeter when they don't have to fight drafts, cousins, and leftover trumpet echoes. Better spectacle. Tenderness wants smaller rooms and fewer witnesses. And when the fair pulls out and the square exhales, you notice how your feet remember the way home without consulting pride. That's the skill prosperity hoped you'd forget. Next, temptations get quieter and closer to home. Servants, apprentices, hired hands, people inside your household orbit will map the etiquette of nearness. Doors, glances, chores, and the polite sentences that keep power from pretending to be love, while marriage life stays human and sane. Open a front door at dawn, and you'll meet the chorus that keeps a house breathing. Clatter of pails, broom whisper on flagstones, bread yeasting into courage. These aren't distant colleagues. They are the people who share your oxygen, maids, grooms, apprentices, close enough to hear the hinge of your private life. In medieval sex and love, nearness is both blessing and booby trap. The smart household admits the risk out loud, then builds paths, hours, and habits so intimacy doesn't get mistaken for invitation and authority, never cosplays as affection. Start with architecture that tells the truth. Thresholds matter. Service doors for errands, hall doors for company, a bedchamber latch that reports to the conscience before it reports to the hand. Benches live where sightlines behave. Screens live where glances might wander. Traffic moves like a polite river, left in the morning, right in the evening, so bodies don't bump into stories. These little geographies are the first layer of bedchamber norms, written in wood and custom rather than sermons no one remembers at midnight. Speech wears uniforms too. A master's please and thank you are not luxuries. They're safety rails. A servant's surmarm isn't groveling. It's armor that keeps talk from sliding downhill on polished floors. Tone is a tool as sharp as a knife. Daytime bright for tasks. Twilight softer but never suggestive. When desire versus doctrine feels the room warming, language turns the flame down without shaming the cook. Sleep is where ethics meets layout. Well, it's for servants near the warm wall. Yes, but not within arm's reach of temptation. Apprentices in the loft, under the eye of the master, and crucially the mistress. Tasks that end before compliance, so tired people make fewer bad poems. Curfews aren't suspicion. They're mercy for folk who wake at cockcrow. In everyday conjugal life, the pillow belongs to the pair. Screens, latches, and predictable bedtimes make sure everyone else remembers it. Gifts are weather vanes. Coin is wage. Bread is thanks. Ribbons, perfume, and secret fruit are storms. A good rule. Praise in daylight, payments at the table with witnesses, nothing that fits under a bodice or warms a wrist. If a maid is courting properly, or an apprentice has an eye on a girl at the bake oven, fold courtship customs into the plan. Sundays free, chaperoned walks. A saving jar labelled with his name. What you forbid in darkness you can often bless in daylight. Guild statutes back you up with dry wisdom. Masters swear to keep apprentices in meat, drink, and good governance, which is beautiful code for no predation. Wives of masters function as ministers of tone, doorkeepers, seating chart geniuses, guardians of the ladle and of the young. A scandal costs more than fines. It burns trust, and trust is the currency that buys rain on bad weeks. In marriage life, a workshop that feels safe makes the bed feel safer. Church courts keep a spare chair for this topic. Church control of intimacy draws a hard line. Consent must be real. Power must not masquerade as love. And confession isn't a broom for sweeping bruises under the pew. A decent confessor asks who holds the keys, who can leave without losing dinner, who is tired enough to say yes, just to end the conversation. When harm happens, penance is not the only news. Protection and placement are too. New service, public apology, sometimes a parish purse for a new start. Rumors the house pet nobody admits feeding. Laundry's here. Bakehouses notice. Stable boys collect data like burrs. You answer not with oaths but choreography. Doors open when praise is given. Jobs assigned in pairs. Errands that could be misread replaced with written lists. If pans begin to sing Charivari, don't perform innocence, demonstrate it. Invite witnesses. Adjust the calendar. Show the ledger. The most persuasive deodorant for suspicion is predictable daylight. Attraction is not a crime. Laziness with power is. If two young people under your roof like the look of each other, you either freeze them into folly or you coach them into courtship customs that once set your thatch on fire. Sunday paths with company, small honest gifts, a band's plan the priest can bless, and a savings target that proves he can afford shoes for more than one person. When the time comes, release them with wages, references, and dignity. Nothing expands a household's honor like launching a marriage that neighbors root for. Crisis drills save reputations. Sickness? Rotate watchers so nobody is alone together long enough to invent a plot. Delivery gone wrong in the servants' quarter? Send the midwife and the mistress, not the master. A theft? Count, bless, and file. The guilty are less likely to become stories when consequences are swift and boring. The house that rehearses emergencies denies melodrama oxygen, which is excellent theology for medieval sex and love under a busy roof. Hiring fairs are your chance to choose peace on purpose. You're not buying hands, you're inviting biographies. Test with 3 questions. What did your last mistress praise? What hours does your patience keep? What joke do you tell when the stew burns? Then make oaths mutual. You promise fair wage and safety. They promise steady work and clean talk. Keys are not trinkets. Ration them like trust. A home that treats entrances like sacraments earns sleep. In the end, nearness becomes school. Children learn from the way you greet the scullion and how you dismiss the flirtatious guest who tries to tip with compliments. Servants, when safe, become proud. Your household grows a reputation that makes market days smoother and winters shorter. And that reputation protects the pair at the center. The quiet republic of everyday conjugal life, far better than locks alone ever could. Hold that poise as we step into our final stage, aging, widowhood, and second chances. When joints argue with stares and mirrors learn new manners, how did couples keep tenderness away? How did widows and widowers navigate desire versus doctrine at the edge of the parish's patience? Remarriage, stepchildren, and the politics of memory. You notice time first in the hands. The way a jug asks for 2 now. The way thread needs brighter light. Mirror isn't cruel. It's honest. And honesty changes how everyday conjugal life moves. Beds get lower, benches nearer the warm wall. Windows open 2 fingers wider, so breath doesn't argue with stairs. In medieval sex and love, aging isn't defeat. It's a re-choreography. Conversations deepen as the calendar does. You trade quick compliments for steady gratitude. You kept the fire. You spared my back. You made the lane kinder. Marriage life becomes the art of noticing. Pride unclenches and suddenly small mercies look like miracles. Laces tied without boasting, stew salted before grumbling, a basin warmed without speeches. Desire versus doctrine stops being a debate club. Desire learns patience, doctrine learns mercy, and both shake hands at supper. The chamber norms evolve like good tools. Heavy blankets give way to layers you can manage at midnight. A warm stone returns to duty like an old friend. A bowl at the bedside saves knees from cold floors. Privacy keeps its manners, but the theatre calms, soft delight, quieter jokes, more time spent telling stories that make the room exhale. The goal isn't fireworks. It's a hearth that still believes in you when ankles don't. Then the chair on the other side of the table goes empty, and the house learns a new grammar. Widowhood is logistics with a shadow. Keys change pockets, jars learn different sounds. The bed measures honesty in the cold inches between blankets. Here, Church control of intimacy protects dignity with practical rights. Black cloth that makes grief legible. You're not asked to be brave. You're asked to be fed and not alone. Grief has chores. Linen changed often. Air widened. Visitors rationed to the kind ones. You discover which friends can sit without fixing you and which proverbs to retire until next spring. Courtship customs turn inside out. Tokens go into prayer books, rings onto ribbons under the chemise, names spoken at the font and the bake oven. The best counsel says, walk when the light is kind. Time, stubborn and cunning, opens odd doors. The butcher's sister mentions a widower who reads by the window and mends his own socks. An aunt whispers that companionship doesn't insult memory. Desire versus doctrine enters with slippers on. The church doesn't forbid second marriages. It simply asks you to mend papers, guard kinship lines, and honor promises that still have work to do. Love, after loss, isn't betrayal. It's stewardship of a life still in motion. Second chances begin with arithmetic. What dowers remain, which children need, which beds? How two sorrow-shaped households can share a table without turning supper into a referendum. You speak plainly. We seek warmth, not thunder. Marriage life at this age loves contracts that are kind. Modest feasts, witnesses who smile, and a band's board that hears more sighs of relief than clucks of scandal. The village rewards courage that doesn't perform. Intimacy returns like spring in a cautious garden. Hands reach before mouths boast. A walk replaces a ballot. Laughter arrives at the pace of trust. Bedchamber norms at 50 are different than at 20. More pillows, less proof, more time negotiating comfort so the morning has no reason to scold. You learn the weather of each other's bones, and the way a kiss edits pain down to size. The room believes couples who arrange their kindness before their claims. Families need choreography. Stepchildren learn new pronouns for the table. Heirlooms receive fresh maps. Memories get invited without becoming tyrants. You keep one corner for the past, a ribbon, a portrait, a joke only the old years understand, while setting two chairs for the future. Church control of intimacy helps here with oaths and blessings that frame, not erase. The altar says, continue, and the lane approves because the washing still gets done. Not every road bends toward remarriage. Some choose companionship that wears a different name. Godparent alliances, shared gardens, neighbouring hearths whose evenings end with prayers across a hedge. Medieval sex and love has more room than we credit. Affection can be kitchen deep without being threshold deep, and a house can be warm without new rings. The test isn't spectacle, it's sleep. If nights stop auditioning for sorrow, the plan is working. Aging together, whether new or long married, becomes a craft. You manage light like medicine. Choose colours that forgive dust, and resentments out of it. The most attractive faces in any century are the ones that learn to rest. Every day, conjugal life at its wisest is just two people, quietly protecting each other's mornings from the accidents of evening. When the bell finally tolls for the last time, the audit is gentle. Did we lower the room's temperature or raise it? Feed our neighbours or feed rumours? Choose repair over rhetoric. The answers live in jars labelled flour and, for others, in letters neatly folded, in children who know where the good ladle sleeps. And that, traveller, is the quiet victory of medieval sex and love, not fireworks, but a hearth still warm enough for someone else to sit by. If you felt a thread running through all of this, you're not imagining it. In the Middle Ages, love wasn't a thunderclap. It was a craft. What we call medieval sex and love lived in small, repeatable moves. A basin warmed, a sentence chosen before pride could volunteer the wrong one. Under feasts and fasts, under bans and ledgers, under church control of intimacy, people protected a fragile treasure by turning it into reliable work. That's the secret. Habit is the armor of the heart. We walked the whole map. Courtship customs at the well, contracts at the porch, bedchamber norms that sounded less like rules and more like good carpentry. We watched desire versus doctrine argue. then shake hands. We saw everyday conjugal life hold the line through plague, famine, fairs, and festivals. Again and again, the couples who thrived weren't the loudest, they were the most consistent. They learned that tenderness starts with logistics and ends with laughter you don't have to explain. Maybe that's what the archive truly teaches. Love is readable. It shows up in linen changed on the third day, in letters that list bread before longing, in the way a door is shut. Marriage life wasn't a poem pinned to the wall. It was a schedule that left room for miracles. And when miracles came, healthy babies, safe returns, second chances, routine was the cradle that held them. Knowing it home. Which one habit will you steal this week? Opening your window 2 fingers. Which myth cracked open for you? What surprised you about the real rulebook? Do you recognize an ancestor's ritual? Grandma's vinegar rinse, a family goodnight order, a market eve mint, now revealed as medieval wisdom with better branding. Tell me in the comments. What's one quiet rule you'll try tonight? Where did the calendar shape your own house more than you realized? Which scene hit hardest? The banns, the bed, the Charivari, or the letter read by candlelight? If this felt less like a video and more like a map you can use, share it with someone who thinks intimacy is an accident and not a skill. Let them see how centuries-old routines can rescue modern rooms from noise. And hey, if you learned something, if you felt seen, if you've got a new sentence to save a future argument, tap like, hit subscribe, and ring the bell so the next chapter finds you. The series continues, but the homework's simple. Protect mornings, practice mercy, and let your house become the kind of quiet that other people can breathe in.